I want to start by acknowledging my collaborators. All of my work is conducted in dialogue with others. So even when I formulate an idea, it does not only come from me. It comes from an interaction and an exchange with colleagues and students. And I want to acknowledge three kinds of collaborators. Most recently, the editorial team, of which I am the head, for the Routledge Handbook of Applied Anthropology. Then my research collaborators. All of my research always involves collaborators, both anthropologists and people from other disciplines. And then finally, I have 20 plus years of learning from students. So here's the outline of how I've organized this presentation. First, I'm going to give kind of an overview of this idea of what it means to go from insights to impact, and then I'll introduce design anthropology, which is my particular area. Then I'm going to give 3 examples of projects related to design anthropology, and finally, I'll close with crafting possible futures. So starting with from insights to impact. So the title of this presentation points to applied research. So that's research that's theoretically grounded. It contributes to theory building, but in addition, the research findings are used to make a practical difference in the world. So we can conceptualize the relationship between theory and application in like that circle figure. So it's like an endless cycle. You use theory to design a research project, and then the research project leads to applications, and then the applications contribute to the development of new theory. In the US, this kind of anthropology often goes under the name of applied anthropology. It's my understanding that in most national traditions of anthropology, including, I believe, the Mexican tradition, there hasn't really been a felt need to have a separate term for applied anthropology because it's understood that anthropology may be applied to make the world a better place somehow, and so theory and application remain more integrated. In the United States, the term applied anthropology also really only became common after World War II. And at the same time, for a variety of historical reasons, academic anthropologists in the US after World War II started to distance themselves from applied work. And in fact, a stigma developed over time for applied work, especially in elite US anthropology departments. However, that has been changing in recent years. Today, applied anthropology is flourishing in the United States. Employment opportunities are robust. Already by 1995, which is 30 years ago now, more than 60% of master's and PhD anthropologists were working outside of the academy. And there's robust institutional infrastructure and support systems, including professional organizations, conferences, awards, journals, and training institutions. So I've been integrating theory and application for my whole career, and I've also been teaching in an applied anthropology program since 2001 at the University of North Texas, or UNT. Most recently, I've been thinking deeply about these issues because Routledge, the press, which publishes a lot of anthropology books in the English-speaking world, they invited me to develop the Routledge Handbook of Applied Anthropology. And we're just about to finish the manuscript and turn it in. It's a huge project. There are 50 chapters. I asked 4 colleagues to be co-editors with me. And we haven't created a cover design yet, so I'm just showing you the template. We're still looking for some nice artwork. In fact, if anyone has ideas for good artwork that we could get the copyright permission on, I'm very open. And by the way, these handbooks are usually very expensive because they're so big, and it was very important to the editorial team to make it free. And so we did a fair amount of fundraising, because you have to pay Routledge to make it free. And at this point, we've reached enough funding that for 1 year you will have to pay, but then after 1 year, the ebook version will be free to anybody who wants it. It will be available around the world. So, on this project of the handbook, we have used a very inclusive definition of application of what does it mean to do applied work. And so we're really just conceptualizing it as any work that seeks to contribute to change in the world. Now, of course, for ethical reasons, you want to make sure that that change is a positive change. But still, that includes many different kinds of activities. So yeah, we consider application to be a very broad umbrella term. Applied anthropology is important because it's a huge source of careers for anthropology students. And certainly in the United States, job opportunities in academia are declining. I don't know the exact situation in Mexico, but in the US, anthropology has been struggling for some time. So after World War II, there was a big growth in academia, but that ended in the late 1960s. And by the 1970s, anthropology departments either stayed at the same level or they started to shrink. And by 2014, only 21% of anthropology PhDs were able to get a tenure-track job at a university. So, and to some extent, I think this is not an anthropology problem, it's a university problem. It's increasingly hard to get financial support from the state. But in any case, so there has been this big rise of practitioner careers. And so practitioner is the word we use in the United States to refer to anthropologists who work outside of the university. So anyone except professors. So you could say that building a career, building an awareness of applied anthropology is really building a future for anthropology. And it's a future that will be shaped by today's students. And I will return to this theme at the end of the presentation. So that brings us to design anthropology, the kind of applied anthropology in which I've been active for many years. And I'll start with the origins of this field, which was the 1990s, pretty recent. United States design firms started to work with anthropologists to learn how users were interacting with the products that they had designed. So what was appealing was the methods of anthropology, which are usually called ethnography. And ethnography usually involves a combination of observation of people going about their everyday lives and interviews. So you can ask the people, well, okay, I saw you did this, but why did you do this? So it's like the what and the why. Ethnography was super appealing to designers when they discovered that it exists because it revealed the user. Not just what users say they do, but what they actually do. And ethnographic studies for design from the start found major discrepancies between designers' intended uses of products and the consumers' everyday behaviors. Anthropologists who work with designers very often video recorded their data, their observations and their interviews. And that ethnographic video provided a window for designers to see what users were actually doing. And so that was very appealing. And by 1997 in the United States, every major design firm at least claimed that they offered ethnography as one of their approaches. And some of the things that ethnography can reveal that are relevant to design are people's everyday practices, as I had said before, also the symbolic meanings of products. So for instance, the meaning of a car you buy is not just about your need to get from point A to point B, but there are lots of symbolic reasons why people buy a particular brand or model. And then finally, ethnography can also reveal the forms of sociality in which a product is embedded. So think about the role that our phones play in our social relationships and communication practices. So design anthropologists are anthropologists who work with designers. And this is a visual representation of the collaborative work process that was created by a company that I worked for back in the 90s called eLab. So that was a design consulting firm. And This image represents the chronological work process of eLab's project teams, which were staffed by a mix of researchers, usually anthropologists, and designers. And the left side of the bow shows the research activities, and the right side shows design activities, and then that knot in the middle is where they kind of come together. So the researchers on the team play a bigger role in the early part of the project, and the designers play a bigger role in the later part, but everybody is involved from beginning to end. So the research moves from like instances to patterns to frameworks. So meaning when you analyze fieldwork data, you start with just like a million little data points, like examples of things that happen, and then you start identifying patterns among those data points, and then you even get like higher level patterns until you have like an explanatory framework. Could also be called a theory, a model, findings. So, and this is, you will find just about any ethnography textbook uses this kind of model, instances, patterns, frameworks, or models. Then on the right side, is kind of the opposite, that design moves from the general to the specific. So you start with these kind of general insights about why people are doing what they do in relation to a product. And then you start with like high-level design recommendations, like, well, if people want this or do this, then the design of the whatever needs to have these features or these qualities. And then you can take that to more and more specifics, ultimately to prototypes, ultimately to, in fact, developing a new product. How far these teams go along that line kind of depends. So design consulting agencies, like when I worked for eLab, we most often stopped with like design recommendations, design concepts, although once in a while we would go on and create prototypes. But this kind of work is also done in-house in corporations that produce the products, and then of course you have a smooth transition on into the product development process. So one of the big differences between anthropology and design is the time orientation. Anthropology provides insights about what already exists, so the present, current practices, or maybe the very recent past. Whereas design is about creating things that don't exist yet. So it's moving toward the future, creating the future. And so design anthropologists have to learn to think like designers, and that is a new orientation for them, but it can be very rewarding to learn to think about the future, shaping the future. Design anthropology often involves interdisciplinary teamwork that goes beyond just the ethnographer and the designer collaboration. Project teams often include, if you're developing a technology, there's going to be technologists of one kind or another, be it computer scientists or engineers or whatever is relevant. It could also be subject matter experts, like if you're developing a medical app, you need some medical experts. And then the majority of design anthropologists work in a business context, so then there may also be like business staff that assist with like the work process, so project managers, product managers, depending on how the organization is organized. I started by talking about the beginnings of design anthropology as designers discovered ethnography. Now to kind of move it forward, the term design anthropology came into use in the 2000s in the United States. Then the conference for this area, the Ethnographic Practice and Design Conference, started in 2005. In the United States education system, UNT became a center. eLab had invented what they called experience models back in the late 90s. And that then kind of spread out into the rest of the design field and started to become called user experience or UX. And now UX is, a very widely used term, although the meaning has evolved somewhat. But at this point, I think you can almost think of design anthropology as UX done by anthropologists. And of course, I think we do it particularly well. The spread of design anthropology or ethnography in design has been very uneven across the US and internationally. So it was established in some parts of the US much earlier than in other parts, and likewise there's international differences. Denmark was an early adopter of design anthropology, but they applied it more to the public sector, so it changed somewhat. And yeah, other parts of Europe. And the EPIC conference took place in Sao Paulo in 2015, and so that's one indication that there did start to be a presence in Latin America, because that conference would not have been able to take place there if there hadn't been a critical mass. Since I became professor, a lot of my design anthropology work has taken the form of university-industry collaboration, and I understand UDLAP is also quite active in this area. So the form of university-industry collaboration that I do is client projects for my design anthropology class. And whenever I teach design anthropology, I set up a semester-long project for a real client, usually major corporations like Motorola, Microsoft, Nissan, Blizzard Entertainment. And my goal with this class is to position students for the job market. So I run the class as much as possible as though I were still a project manager at a design consulting firm. According to the literature on university-industry partnerships, many of these partnerships fail or fail to achieve their full success. And that's often because there are conflicting goals, incentives, and timelines. I've always had good experiences myself with these partnerships, and I wrote a publication with one of my collaborators on the process. Her name is Krista Metcalf, and she worked at Motorola. And one of our key insights was that all the participants in our collaboration saw value in the project. So for anthropology students, they really valued doing an ethnographic project for a well-known client. It was often their first experience doing research for a client, which is very different from just doing research for yourself, like where you fully create everything. And then for design students, they were often interested in learning ethnographic skills, and they were able to add to their portfolio and also put, the company on their resume. And then the value for Motorola was threefold. So Krista worked in the research center, the Applied Research Center, on a team called the Interactive Media User Research Team. And that team did research on how people interact with media, how they interact with each other around media, and how they communicate with each other through media. And of course, the team had a limited number of team members, and they always wanted to do more research than they had capacity for, and so the class was a way to extend their capacity. And then a second form of value was diversity of perspective. They felt that working with students and faculty gave them new perspectives that contributed to their innovation. And thirdly, the collaboration established university ties that were valued by their organization. So I'm going to give you 2 case studies of class projects I've done. And first, let me just give sort of the general structure of the design anthropology class. So I always made sure to have half anthropology students and half design students. I accepted both undergraduate and graduate students. The class usually had about 12 to 20 people. Well before the semester started, I planned the project with the client. There was a lot of work that went into the planning. And then, so a semester is about 15 weeks. And so the first 5 weeks would usually be like introduction and training, because the design students often had no background in ethnographic research. So there was a training process. So first 5 weeks, introduction training, second 5 weeks, field work, and then the last 5 weeks, analysis and preparation of deliverables. You have to be really strong with time management in a 15-week semester, because it's aggressive to make those goals work. The class meets once a week for 3 hours, and so half of every class meeting, like the first hour and a half about, would be like a traditional class where we would talk about the readings that the students had done for that week. And then the second half of the class, like the other 1.5 hours, would be spent working on the research project. There was a lot of commitment from the client. So ideally, the client participated in every class virtually. Of course, they weren't in my town, right? But so they would, in the early days, we used teleconferencing. Now we use Zoom so that they could be part of every class meeting. And then they also visited 3 times at the beginning, the middle, and the end of the semester. And at the end, students did the final presentation, and then the client would do like a pizza party or some kind of celebration like that. And the client, like the students and me, we didn't get paid, but the client picked up all our expenses. So like, of course, the travel and incentives for study participants when those were relevant, and the pizza party at the end. So the first example is a project for Blizzard Entertainment. If anyone doesn't know, this company makes video games like World of Warcraft. Our client contact at Blizzard was a former student of mine named Diana Hubbard, and she is now head of design and senior director for both Battle.net and platform technologies within Blizzard Entertainment. I myself am not a gamer, but most of my students were, and it was kind of interesting, like they knew more about the topic than I did, which was fun. This project took place during the pandemic, and so I actually learned a lot about how important gaming is. Like I went from thinking of it just as like a leisure activity to realizing that it provided very important social contact and community for people. I'm going to show you some slides from the client presentation that my students created. And one of the joys of working with design students is that you end up with fabulous looking slides. You can tell I didn't have design help with like my slides. So I'm just gonna go over the introduction to the project and then one of the 6 topics in our report. So the question that Diana gave us was, do console gamers utilize devices outside of their console to communicate with friends or teams while playing together? And if so, what can we learn about these communication practices? So the main focus was on gamers who were playing with people who were using different consoles. And then Diana also broke this down into a lot of more like specific sub-questions, like what do they use today? What do they like or dislike about it? What are their pain points? There were 10 study participants. Students mainly recruited them from their social circles. While the number of participants was fairly small, they were very carefully selected for diversity in terms of age, gender, and race and ethnicity, and background or profession, so that they could represent a larger population as much as possible. Here are the students in the class. Theoretically, it was a face-to-face class, but due to the pandemic, it was actually on Zoom. There were 16 graduate students and 4 undergraduates. Half of them were design students, half of them were anthropology students. They were all amazing. I really, really liked working with them. So students conducted fieldwork in pairs, anthropology and design. Each pair did fieldwork with 1 study participant, and the fieldwork included 3 parts, all video recorded. There was a pre-gaming interview of about 30 minutes where the researchers established rapport with the study participant and got kind of basic information about their gaming practices. Then there was the gaming observation where they watched the participant play some kind of game that they normally played for about 30 minutes. And then there was a post-gaming interview where they asked about what happened during the game. They could even play back, bits of the recording to say, what happened here? Like, why did you do this? The interviews were semi-structured, so that means that the students started with a list of questions, but they could also spontaneously add on new questions as relevant. And everything was done over Zoom, so it was recorded and transcribed. We ended up with 18 hours and plus of recordings and 641 pages of annotated transcripts, which is a lot. Here's an overview of our analysis process. So the initial analysis of the data happened in class meetings. So each fieldwork team did like an informal presentation about their study participant and showed video clips. And then the class would compare like that participant to previous participants. And so that way they started to identify patterns. And we would keep writing those patterns in a brainstorming document on Google Docs. And then at the end of that phase, things had sort of started to cluster, and when we used a Miro board to cluster patterns more broadly. And then from that, we identified 6 chapters for the final report, and then students volunteered to work on chapters. It was like 3 to 5 students per chapter, whatever topic they felt interested in. And then, to be very thorough and rigorous, they did coding of all the transcript data in Deduce, and then prepared the deliverables. Here's a picture of our Miro board. Maybe I'll just kind of zip through this. This is our analysis in Deduce, which is a qualitative analysis software. Maybe I want to move on. So then the one topic that I will share with you here as an example is managing toxicity. So what you'll see is that we always start with the research findings and then provide the design implications for those findings. So we want it to be very clear where our design recommendations come from. Like, they don't just come from our imagination or our head. They are always based on the research. So for the younger people in this class, I'm sure this is nothing surprising. 9 out of 10 study participants had a lot to say about toxicity, and so that means, like, when one player attacks another, often the attacks are related to the player's gender or race. Young kids are known for especially saying racist and sexist things. And then we also heard people talking about that politically conservative players might lash out at women or people of color or other marginalized groups. Another reason for being attacked might be if you weren't as competent, less skilled than some of the really hardcore players. If your audio quality was not as good because you didn't invest that much money in your equipment, that could also be attacked. And then if you just were too relaxed and casual about your gaming, that could get attacked by more hardcore gamers. So here's, I guess, sorry, I was behind. Here's a quote, an example, a video clip.
And when politics, when the election and stuff like that was happening, all that crazy stuff, I feel like Overwatch was at its all-time high on toxicness. And that was a really rough time to play, just because I'm not only gay, but of course, African-American woman, and people have their views about that, and especially in politics. And so once people hear that you're that kind of person, they have a lot to say, but you have to think about what might be going on in their life, what their views are. If they have those views, you know what, that's fine. Just I just don't want to hear it, But you just have to, it's just something that you have to get over and you have to get used to, and just have those situations in your mind ready so that you're ready when it happens and you're not caught off guard.
So a lot of data like that led us to identify that people are already managing toxicity in a variety of ways. And so the ways that we identified were, well, first of all, communication in gaming is essential for team building and for the effective execution of a gaming strategy. But at the same time, players also need to protect themselves from unsustainable levels of toxicity. So there were a number of strategies that people used. One was to mute other players during gameplay. Another was to just avoid talking themselves. That was often a strategy used by women because they were concerned about being identified as a woman by their voice. And then another common strategy was utilizing the trusted circle, meaning that they only played with friends and people they knew. And here's another example of someone talking about that.
Now, though, I don't really play. I play a lot of online games, but it's with people I know and have hung out with in real life. And so calling, or having those people call me bad names versus randoms is like, we're joking. Like, I know we're joking. Or if they're being serious, I can just be like, I'm cutting you out by. Like, there's never that factor of like anonymity, I guess. Mm-hmm. Like, that's, I think, why a lot of people are toxic, because they know if they call someone like terrible names on the internet, nothing bad's gonna happen. They're not gonna like get doxxed. Their mom won't know. Like, nothing will happen to them. But like, I mean, one of my like best friends from high school, if he were to call me those names, I know his mom. I could tell his mom and be like, hey, your son called me this. Like, what are you gonna do? And so like, I guess, one, I don't really make friends with those kind of people anyway, but two, like, that anonymity is gone. Like, I know their full names. I know whereabout they live. Like,
So the students came up with 3 kinds of design implications. The first was to use the technology of artificial intelligence and machine learning as tools to help admins and moderators flag toxic behaviors and conversations in party chats and chat apps like Discord. The final report had a long discussion of ongoing efforts in that direction. This is again 2021. So there was Bleep, a software that used AI to censor offending language, and Blizzard Entertainment was experimenting with filters as well. So those efforts were still under development, but they were taken into account. Then a second idea was an award and badging system where players could give awards to others as a way to show appreciation for a really nice post or comment. And you can see a possible prototype here. And again, the report had a lot more sort of background on this possibility. And thirdly, was an idea of connecting players using tags. So players could like filter and search for people and communities that they would like to interact with. There could be tags like LGBTQ friendly or anti-racist. There could be a list of preset tags that people could add to their profiles, as well as users could submit a suggested new tag to an admin for review and approval. And so again, here's some mock-ups of a possible user interface. So that is a small slice of the Blizzard Entertainment project. And now I'll move on to another project. This was a project with Nissan's research lab that is developing self-driving cars or autonomous vehicles. This project took place in 2014, which is a long time ago when there was more optimism about self-driving cars than there is now. I also did a second project with the same Nissan lab in 2018, but I'm going to talk about the first one today. So they had just hired a very famous anthropologist, Giddy Jordan, to head up the ethnographic research there. She is one of like the mothers of what became design anthropology. She worked at Xerox PARC, which was sort of an incubator for this approach back in the 1980s and 90s, and I was so excited to collaborate with her. And she appreciated the opportunity to use my class to extend her research capacities because she didn't have much of a team yet at Nissan. So our project was exploratory because Giddy was new to the topic, and also because very little research had been done in this area. So our goal was to generate a foundational understanding of how Americans understand and drive their cars. We were laying the groundwork for future ethnographic research that would then take a look at like more narrowly defined topics. So we designed 2 interrelated research questions. First, we wanted to map out the social life of the car, meaning we wanted to illuminate the web of relationships and contexts in which the car is embedded. And secondly, we wanted to make driving visible. Now, driving is such a ubiquitous activity that it seems like it already is visible, but surprisingly little research had been done actually observing and video recording people driving as they went about their daily life. So like the other project, anthropology and design students were paired up. Each team did research with one study participant whom they recruited from their social networks. And then there was this set of 3 methods. And this slide and the next will just show you the table of contents so you can get a sense of the topics that we ended up exploring. The driving behaviors section was the longest one, and in many ways it really was the heart of the study. The greatest strength of our research may be that we were able to actually accompany people in their daily life as they went around driving. And we found driving behaviors to be amazingly complex and layered. Drivers simultaneously monitor the road, interact with other people in the car, interact with virtual people via their phone, eat, drink, smoke, play with their music, check their dashboard. They do so many things. And our theoretical approach was shaped by a field called conversation analysis, which focuses on very closely observing how people interact with each other, and then that's also been extended to how they interact with the environment around them and objects. And then we also looked at the role of the car in people's lives and ended with some ideas for the future. So I'll give you snippets of 2 findings as examples. I'm just going to pull out a few points. So first, in the section attending to the environment and people outside of the car, one of the topics was communication channels. And here's an interview with someone who talked about the different ways he communicates with other drivers.
How would you connect with another car? Like, when you're on the road, how do you connect with other drivers? Or how do you talk to other drivers or get their attention?
I yell so much.
Do you yell so they can hear you, or?
No, I just yell out of frustration sometimes.
You use like hands for signaling or something?
Sometimes. I mean, I'll honk. I don't usually honk out of frustration though, mainly because my car has a really wimpy horn. But like if someone's backing up and they don't see me, I'll give them a little tap just to let them know I'm there, or if, you know, the light is green or something like that. But I don't normally honk out of frustration. I don't know how we communicate, like just kind of seeing each other, but you don't really make eye contact. Probably one thing that pisses me off the most is when I let someone in and they don't wave. Like I wave whenever people let me in, and I get so mad when people don't do that. Or if someone cuts me off, I'll like throw my hands up like, what the heck, man? But I don't usually honk or do anything past that, but
Yeah.
I don't know, I guess communication is really, it's two-way, but it's also one-way, because like you rarely make eye contact unless you're like stopped at a light next to each other, or like you wave someone in if they're like, you know, coming out of a gas station trying to get onto a busy street. But for the most part, you just kind of have to assume they know what you mean. Like if you slow down and let them get over, like they can't see you going like this, or they can't make eye contact with you. So I guess a lot of it is nonverbal.
So when we added up all the information our study participants talked about in their interviews and demonstrated while driving, we came up with these 4 communication channels. And we were actually amazed at how limited the communication channels are once we started to think about it. Car manufacturers could have done way more to enable communication between drivers. And so one of our recommendations to Nissan was to add more communication channels. And this had an impact. Nissan's 2015 concept car included several new communication channels. The stated goal of these tools was to build trust with autonomous vehicle technology. So there was this illuminated strip of lights around the exterior, which would turn red when there was a pedestrian or a bicycle in the vicinity to say, like, I see that you're near me. And then there was a display on the dashboard, like facing out for people outside to see, that would have messages on it, like, after you. Then I have another example, but I think for time reasons, I'm going to skip it. So sorry. So because I wanted to give a final example of like not in the business context. So the point here is to show that you can also use design anthropology in very different settings. And so this is not a class project. This is my research with collaborators in Northeast India. So members of 2 indigenous communities. I understand that for many Mexican anthropologists, working with indigenous communities is a normal and common thing to do, but for me, I came to it much later in my career, so it's quite novel. But the kind of work I'm doing is still design anthropology. It's still developing technologies or designing them to make them user-friendly and useful to users. So, and also in this collaboration, I am not the expert on the indigenous communities, my collaborators are. So I am just the expert on a platform and on helping to embed the platform in a socio-technical system. So the 2 communities I work with are in the state of Assam, which is the red state. You can see there's that, Northeast India is that section way off to the right, which is almost separated from the rest of India. It is very culturally diverse. There are several hundred different languages spoken there. But the majority of them are in the Tibeto-Burman language family, which means they're related to Chinese. They have no relationship to Hindi at all. And so also, if you know kind of what's around there, it's wedged between like Myanmar and Nepal and Tibet. And so the communities are much more affiliated with those areas. And they encounter discrimination in mainland, what they call mainland India, due to their appearance. There have been efforts to gain independence, but the Indian state does not seem to want to let them go. So one of the communities I work with is the Bodos. There's 1.5 million Bodos. They are more assimilated than the other group, but they're also more politically powerful. They had some very fierce independence movements and eventually negotiated with the Indian state and got quite a bit of autonomy, as well as resources like some universities and other resources. Including that the language, Bodo language, became one of India's 22 official languages in 2003, which is a huge advantage because it means you could take the civil service examinations in Bodo. The other community is the Dimasa. There's about 260,000 of them. They are less assimilated than the Bodo, but they have less political power. So they have no schools, like their language has no standing. In Northeast India, communities are very concerned about preserving their languages and traditional cultures. It's still the language of the home, so children do still grow up speaking it at home, but often outside of the home, it is not used, like especially for the Dimasa, their school is in a different language. And the workplace, market, everything outside the home is in other languages. And there's just also a huge loss of traditional cultural knowledge, especially among the youth and especially in urban areas. And the picture is a Dimasa dance performance, very traditional with the raised hands. And for these communities in Northeast India, there's sort of this combination of like the dance, the music, and the clothing, which is woven. So weaving, all those things are kind of like together as important parts of the identity. So the communities are engaged in a lot of revitalization activities. Every community has their own literary society that encourages community members to write poetry and literature and so forth. This picture is of a man who writes poetry and puts it on Facebook, so he's showing us some of his poems. There's also efforts to teach cultural activities, like in after-school programs and weekend programs, things like that. So, I came across this really interesting example of a revitalization activity. This was a genre of performance that apparently is not uncommon in South Asia. It was organized by a teacher in a high school in a Bodo village. It's kind of like a fashion show, but it showcases traditional artifacts, dance, music, and rituals, and it's actually a way of teaching the children about their own traditions by performing them, or snippets of them. This this is just a bit of it. It went on for like, I don't know, maybe hour and a half, 2 hours, and I just took some little pieces. But you can see like this genre, right? It's really interesting. It's sort of like a fashion show, but then they're like showing the artifacts and then showing what you do with the artifacts. Yeah, this basket in front here is an altar for their religion. Their religion is called Bateau, and like every formal event, they make this altar with, and everything has symbolic meaning, like the bamboo circles and the plant in the middle, and yeah, everything is very symbolic. And you can also see the traditional clothing. It goes on, but I think for time reasons, that the ending is spectacular. I wish I could show you, but I should probably not take the time. Okay. Because I also want to show you a little snippet of, so this is Keshe Mashahari, the teacher who developed that, and he's quite a visionary with regard to language revitalization and cultural revitalization.
What do your language and culture mean to you?
Pardon?
What do your language and culture
And
mean
he's
to
wearing
you?
the scarf
I don't
of
know
the
if that's a
Bodos.
good question to answer.
Okay. I think that our identity runs with the culture. Without culture, we are living like a tree without leaf, like that. So, without culture, we will lose our identity. So, language and culture is very important for us to survive along with our identity. And I feel that the mother language is the sweetest language of the world. I feel like that. My own language.
Yeah.
Because I can express in my language in a better way. Whatever I want to express, my thoughts, my ideas, I can explain only in my language. Like I'm explaining in English, but I'm not able to express my thoughts and feelings. But if I express it my own language, I will be more effective one.
Yes.
So I believe that language is very important to survive in art with and culture and language. These two is very important. Without culture, a community is like what I have said, like a tree without leaf. I feel like that.
So my main collaborators on this effort are Dr. Murali Longmailai, who is Dimasa, and she's a linguistics professor at Assam University, and Dr. Bihung Brahma, who is Bodo, and he is a linguistics professor at Central Institute of Technology, Kokrachar. And here are the goals that they identified from their point of view. This is in a publication that we co-wrote. So they said there are no other open access archives for Northeast Indian languages in India. They really want to promote and preserve the existing and dying traditions of their communities, and that for them the target audiences to create an archive are their own communities, other indigenous communities, and as well as academics. And the long-term goal is also not only to have a digital archive, but also for like especially elderly people in certain other contexts to print out, like to create print versions of the cultural and linguistic information. So in terms of design methods, we used a participatory participatory design approach, this is an approach that was originally developed in Scandinavia in the 1970s and associated with workplace democracy, but since then it has spread around the world, really expanded into any setting. And so we used sort of what I brought to the project was my knowledge of Mukurtu, which is for techies, it's a customization of Drupal. And it's a free and open source platform that is specifically designed for indigenous heritage. It's widely used by indigenous communities in the United States, Canada, Australia, but it was unknown in India. So it allows communities to take ownership of their digital materials and archiving process. And so that flexibility allows Mukurtu sites to reflect the knowledge system and the worldview of a particular indigenous community rather than reproducing the knowledge system of Western science, like most top-down archives. And so doing this is at the core of indigenous theory and indigenous research methods. Here's the homepage we designed. So our decisions included the name of the site, making the homepage as trilingual as possible. So obviously that's English at the bottom. Bodo is written with the Devanagari script, so it's on the left. Dimasa is written with the Roman script, so it's on the right. The logo, we designed its weaving patterns. The top half is the Bodo weaving pattern. The bottom half is a Dimasa weaving pattern. And they chose these dancing women as symbols, so you can again see the common symbolism. And you can visit the URL. I mean, it's a work in progress, but there's quite a bit up already. And so in Mukurtu, each community can set up a homepage. So this is the Bodo homepage. Again, they chose their altar as their symbol, their banner image, and then there's like a summary in English and then in Bodo about who are the Bodo people. And then there are two sides to a Mukurtu site, the cultural side and the linguistic side. These are examples. The cultural side, you can have a lot more text than what you see there. I mean, you can have infinite amounts of text if you want, but so you can really get in depth with describing different, could be objects, could be cultural practices, could be anything. You can have photos, you can have videos. It's very flexible what you can put up there. So right now there are 920 cultural heritage items and 1,692 words in the dictionary. So let's see. The Dimasa team did this really cool project called the Community Outreach Program. I don't have time to talk about it now, but if you want to ask me later, it's a really cool project. So to put the archive project in a little bit of context, and I know I'm rushing through these things here, but so one thing that's important to keep in mind is that we're not just developing a technology, but in order for the archive to be successful, we have to build an ecosystem of relationships around the technology. So there are like three circles: the archive managers, the users who either access materials or upload materials, or at least donate, and then the community in the outer circle. Another relevant piece of context is that India created a radically new education policy in 2020, which for the first time ever said that every community should be able to have education in their mother tongue. That was never how things were before. So that creates sort of a fertile ground, and including even this thing that there should be like websites and web portals, ways of storing information on the web. So our project is very much in line with that. And then once we started doing the project, like I said, there's like several hundred indigenous communities, all very close together in Northeast India, and other communities started hearing about the archive project and became interested and would contact my collaborators in India and asking for training workshops on Mukurtu. So we've done several training workshops. This is from one of them, the concluding ceremonies. And I think we'll continue to do so, because yes, some communities are starting their own archives now. So then, in conclusion, I want to return to students and the future of anthropology. Given the limited opportunities in academia, many of today's students will need to find jobs as practitioners. And so building an awareness of careers in design anthropology and other varieties of applied anthropology is building a future for anthropology. There are already a number of practitioners in Mexico. For instance, Max Mattis is an anthropologist who works in Tijuana. He consults in design and market research, and he contributed a chapter to the Routledge Handbook of Applied Anthropology, co-authored with Otto McDonald, who was a student in our UNT program. And I'm sure there are many other opportunities to craft practitioner careers in Mexico. Beyond design anthropology, there are anthropologists around the world working in diverse domains such as environmental issues, global health, human rights. Jobs span the public sector, the private sector, the nonprofit sector. They're everywhere. And there are resources to help you find a path. And I've given you a link to one resource that actually has a lot of information on it, the Anthropology Career Readiness Network. And so through a greater diversity of careers in the future, the next generation will craft an anthropology that is not at home just in academia, but at home everywhere in the world. Thank you.